One day while exploring near the Corvega factory, we noticed some strange rock formations in the distance. Our compass said that there's a location here, so heading due northeast from the factory, we discover Vault 108. It's an interesting place to put a vault, but okay. Progressing forward, we can head on through the shack door into the vault's entryway. We walk into a little cave system with some Brahmin skeletal remains lining the cave. We also find a cinder block and tin can and all sorts of other garbage and grime. Progressing further into the cave, we find human remains, both skeletonized and the fresh corpse of a wastelander who was carrying quite the supply of medicine with him. We also find another Brahmin skull, another actual skeleton, and the corpse of a mole rat. Progressing on further in, we notice the door is already open. Peering through the gap between the big gear-shaped door and the wall, we can indeed verify that this is, in fact, Vault 108. As we walk our way into the main entryway, we find another corpse of a mole rat and a massive blood splatter all over some machine. Heading on into a little observation room here, we find some more fried machinery. The power in this place seems to be, my guess is, on some sort of auxiliary system, because the only lighting we have here is from a handful of still functioning machines and some floodlights. It is very dark in here. We also find the corpse of a raider who has some shotgun shells on him. And heading through a doorway, we start to hear noises. Hello? There's more Brahmin skeletal remains in here. Pulling out our rifle, we can be prepared for whatever is approaching. And it is a mole rat. Thanks to the animal friend perk, all these critters are friendly, so don't have to worry about them. Turning right, we notice some skeletons. One of them was armed with a silenced 10mm pistol. And we find the door leading to the Vault 108 living quarters. But we're not done here yet. We find a lot of skeletons around here. Some more mole rats. And Gary 42 lying among some skeletons and dismembered body parts. Gary 42. Why not just Gary? Why is there a number here? That's strange. Heading past this obscure scene, we stumble into another reactor room of sorts. There's a door leading somewhere. Above the door it says lab, so I'm guessing that leads to the vault's lab. Turning left, we enter into a storage room of sorts with a bunch of ruined books and busted up machines. Nothing we can really use in here. Heading across the room, we enter into another little storage area. There's blood all over the floor. Passing by a mole rat, we stumble upon some more blood, dismembered body parts, and two more skeletons in the corner here. Turning around and turning right, we also, before we head out, we can also loot some food and drink off of a shelf. Look through a toolbox with some other garbage in it. Turning right, we enter into another reactor room with a bunch of broken servers. We also find another skeleton laying on the staircase. There's an empty footlocker in here. My guess is that since we found this vault open, that scavengers have been through here and have picked this place clean. But we also have this instance of Gary 42, who is wearing a Vault 108 jumpsuit. Well, I guess we'll find some more answers as we head on into the living quarters. Passing through the door, we find another corpse of another wastelander who has some bottle caps on him. As we make our way down the staircase, we see a doorway leading into the vault's atrium and another little room to our right. Heading on in here first, we find a couple non-functioning terminals, a couple lockers that have nothing in them, and a first aid kit. We also find another toolbox with some scrap in it, another busted terminal, a vacuum cleaner, and a bunch of other junk, but a lot of the containers in here have already been picked through. My guess is, again, people have definitely been through here with some mixed results, but judging by all the Wastelander and Raider corpses. There's not much to see in here, so heading out and heading down the hallway, we enter into the vault's atrium. Where are we here? Gary. A bunch of vault dwellers run across the catwalk and run up the staircase. One pulls a gun and starts shooting. Gary 32. Huh. Gary 33. Our VATS camera allows us to notice they are indeed wearing Vault 108 jumpsuits, so these are residents of this vault. Just all named Gary. There's Gary 27. And all of them are homicidal? And they keep saying their own name like they're some sort of Pokemon. The other Gary that was up there has wandered off. Oh wait, no, he's found the staircase and made his way downstairs, so let's put a quick bullet in his torso. Alright, that was Gary 33, I think. That's bizarre. Gary 33. Gary... How many Garys are there? Alright, so with the atrium seemingly clear, let's try to explore this place. Heading into the room on the far end here, we enter into a storage room of sorts with a bunch of tipped over shelves, and again, not really much to see here. Why did they put like utensils in it? I don't know. Maybe the Garys are responsible for some of this stuff, but it's a lot of junk in here, so we're just gonna turn around. We find more lockers that have nothing in them leaning against the wall. We see a cafeteria. Heading on into this cafeteria, we find some refrigerators and a little bar. There's a scale book on the counter, and 2 rad roaches chilling out near the door. Let's clear these things out. Okay, with the bugs dealt with, we can reload our weapon, and see that the door here leads to the reactor. Weird place for it to connect. Why connect the reactor to the kitchen, but whatever. We can loot some food out of the refrigerator. We find another Brahmin ribcage and another old skeleton. Opening the door to the reactor, we find it blocked up with assorted furniture, so we're not getting through that way. Turning around, we can look through the rest of this cafeteria, but there's not really much to see, so turning around and heading back to the atrium, we find Gary 29, who pulls a lead pipe and charges, so... Sorry, pal, we had to... doing what I need to do to survive. They're all Garys. They're all numbered. This one's 29, the one over there is 33. When we found in the... What is happening here? Wish these terminals worked, but... Heading across the hall here, we find a living quarters with a desk, a bunch of books, a microscope, and a large bed. Heading out, we find some more lockers and tipped over shelves. We could open a door leading into another living quarters. We find some food still on the shelf. And a bunch of other garbage. There's chairs on top of the desks. It's an utter mess here. I'm guessing the way down there leads to further into the vault, so heading to the staircase where we got ambushed by Gary 33 here. I'm guessing this will lead on top of into the upper areas of the atrium, and indeed it does. We find some food on a desk, and the other 2 Garys we killed. We've got Gary 32 and 27. One has some ammunition on him. We also find a dead rad roach with some meat. Heading into the first door we see on this level of the atrium, we enter into another bedchamber. We find some lockers with, again, nothing in them. Some apples on a bed, and an assortment of empty containers, although we do find some bottle caps and a footlocker. There's also a tricycle in here for some reason. Heading across the catwalk here, we can walk into the other side of the upper atrium. We have a door here that's already open, leading into another living quarters with another large bed, and an easy locked safe. Taking the time to pick it, I'm not very good at this apparently. But we do manage to open the thing up where we find some bottle caps, pre-war money, and some booze. Heading out and to the right again, we can head on into, once again, another living quarters with some roller skates on the floor, some hazard cones, a toolbox with some random junk in it, and that's all she wrote. If we head across the catwalk again and look past the Gary corpses, we can see a window leading into presumably the overseer's office. but there's no way to it. We can see the door controls, but there is no door. If we head back into the hallway here where the door to the office should be, we can see that the door just simply doesn't exist. We're not getting into the overseer's office, and from what we can see through the window, it doesn't look like there's anything in there. I don't know what's going on with that, but we're not going to get any answers from the overseer because his office doesn't really exist. Unfortunate. Well, this leaves us with one path left to go, and that is that other staircase leading down. So, retracing our steps back to the lower level of the atrium, we can turn around and head down the staircase, and we see the door leading to the lab. We also find another room to our right, similar to the one we walked into on our way into the atrium. We find another locked safe. I'm still not very good at this, but second try is the charm. We find some more money inside. We find a locker that has garbage in it, and another first aid kit. We do find a couple terminals in here. However, neither of them are functioning, so any information they may provide is unfortunately lost to time. Heading out the door, we can finally enter the Vault 108 cloning lab. Heading on in, we are ambushed by Gary 36 here, who is wielding a lead pipe, and walked out of a reactor room of sorts. Okay. This is bizarre, guys. Turning around, we see doors leading to the various dorm rooms here. The door to the right here leads to the female dorm, but it's blocked up with furniture and lockers and things. We're not getting by that, so we can close this door and open the door to our left, which presumably leads to the male dorm, I'm guessing. Heading down this hallway, we find another Gary, Gary 12. Okay. And so this pathway here branches off in a couple different directions. Heading left first, we enter into another storage room of sorts. We find some non-functioning machines, some laundry detergent, and a locker with some leather armor inside. We also find some laundry appliances. Heading on down the hallway here, we enter into a clinic with Gary 41 at the helm. What is happening here? We hear... Oh, I saw somebody else, so heading down the hallway here, let's quickly take care of Gary 43 before we explore this clinic to the fullest. Alright, with this Gary taken care of, we can reload, turn back around, and check the corpse of this guy. He has a knife. We also find another corpse of a Wastelander here, laying on top of one of the examination tables. There is blood everywhere. And we can see that his neck is really veiny. The Garys here must have been running some sort of experiments on him. We find more lockers with combat armor inside. And your standard run-of-the-mill clinic supplies. Some microscopes, weird science stuff, x-ray, things, a ventilator. We also find a skeleton laying on top of another examination table. And some tipped-over dividers leaning against the wall here. Heading on to the other side of the clinic here, we find more empty lockers, busted terminals, the corpse of Gary 43 here, who also had a knife. Oh, hello. We get shot at by Gary number 1. And, okay. Patient 0 is taken care of. I'm guessing, I don't know. Gary 1 just kind of sounds like it's the first one. Turning on, we find a first aid box. And heading on into this room, we find the Charisma bobblehead. What a place to find a Charisma bobblehead. We find some hospital beds in this room, knocked over chairs. Mold is everywhere. We also find a copy of Lying Congressional Style laying on one of the tables in here, so this room is privy to plenty of interesting stat loot. Heading on to this other side of the clinic, we find a busted up terminal, the corpse of Gary 1. Oh, And we get ambushed by other Garys in the hallway. We find Gary 17 and 41. Taking the shots, we managed to kill 17, but not exactly getting 47 yet. Okay, now we got him. And Gary 25 races from around the corner to ambush us with his bare hands. But his bare hands can't really do anything against the Lincoln repeater rifle. Turning back around, this side of the clinic is a dead end. Turning around here, we find another living quarters. Okay, I'm just trying to get my bearings here. We find more living quarters. Okay, we find Gary 12. Okay, so we've completed this loop of this side of the vault. Okay, let's head back down to where we were. Oh, there's also a door to our left, which leads into... I'm not entirely sure what this room is, but... it has another busted terminal. Heading across the hall, we find another living quarters. Nothing of note in here. Not even any empty containers. Heading down the hallway, we enter into another living quarters with a bunch more garbage, tin cans, toilet. Okay, heading back out. Turning left, we find the corpses of the Garys. There's the clinic again. There's Gary 17 here. Turning right, we enter into another living quarters with a bunch of milk bottles for some reason and a step ladder. Heading out in the hallway again. Oh, that's the dude's head. Turning left, we enter into another living quarters. Nothing of note there. Find a fork to the right. Heading on straight first, we find Gary 47 here. And another closet. We find some metal boxes, but none of which really have anything of note, or really anything at all. Heading down the hall here, we can turn left and head up a staircase, which leads to another doorway. Progressing down this hallway, we can turn left into another little checkpoint room with a first aid box. And a locker with combat armor, a couple knives, and some scissors. Okay, turning left again, we open up another door. Heading through a hallway, we find some ammunition boxes on a shelf. That's helpful. Heading up a staircase and turning right, we find another doorway, which leads us back to the entrance. So this doorway would lead us back into the reactor side of things that we stumbled upon when we first walked into the place. Okay, so with that side taken care of, let's retrace our steps. There's still a few other areas in this vault we have not been in yet, and so far nothing has been explained. We have a bunch of Garys and a barely lit vault with a bunch of corpses, but nothing we can really piece together. Retracing our steps back to... Okay, this is... Yeah, we've been here. Retracing our steps back to the main entryway of this side of the vault. We find Gary 36 over here in a full reactor room, but there's nothing here. It's a dead end in here. There has to be something in this vault, right? Something that gives an idea of what happened here other than Gary? Well, across from that room I had no idea what it was. I'm blind and completely missed this other little experimentation room. We find a skeleton with a holotape next to him, with titled Cloning Log. Pulling up the log on our Pip-Boy, we can take a peek at what happened here. Corruption detected. Attempting partial recovery. Some gibberish. Number 53. Gary 53 is hostile towards all non-clones, as was something case with the previous 52 attempts. We may have to consider a means of disposal of the pre-existing Gary clones, as the observation rooms are getting quite full. Attempt 54. Gary 54 exhibits no change in hostility towards non-clones. If anything, he is even more hostile. Dr. Peterson can attest to this, having been injured while examining Gary 54. Tomorrow, we are going to dispose of several of the Gary clones, which will leave room for many more attempts. So, there we have it. clear as day. Vault 108's experiment was cloning. So the people in this vault, this Dr. Peterson person, and I'm assuming a staff, decided to clone this one dude, Gary, at least 54 times. I mean, you'd think if they're all homicidal and all violent towards anybody who isn't a Gary clone, you think they would have stopped after, like, Gary 5 or something, but and maybe tried a different subject or decided that maybe this line of research isn't worth it. But no, there's at least 54 of them. They're somehow still alive after all this time. And just as these scientists have observed, they're still very hostile. Some even arming themselves and shooting at us upon our entry. Again, we also find a bunch of corpses lining the place of outsiders. So they definitely have lined up quite the kill count. This is a bizarre one for sure, but this is the only piece of information we get from this vault. This one holotape, which does give us some insight into the Garys and their existence, that they are indeed clones of somebody named Gary. We even found Gary number 1, the first attempt. But that can't be it, right? There has to be something else other than this one holotape, right? Well, that is in fact everything for Vault 108. At least in terms of the vault itself, so we can go ahead and leave and close the door behind us to ensure that any subsequent Garys don't run out. But that's it. That's all we got for the vault itself. But fear not, this is not where our story goes cold. If we head on down to the I'm thinking the Garys are kind of rubbing off on me. But if we head down to the outpost for the outcasts, the outcast outpost, if you will, we stumble upon a battle between the Brotherhood outcasts and super mutants. We can help if we want to. See ya, fella. But after we're done messing with the super mutants, we can head on to an elevator,
Find someone else to bother, local.
just as friendly as ever, and flip the switch on this elevator, which leads us down into this outpost. We find some armor I've disposed of on my way out from the last time I was here. An old Vault 101 jumpsuit, and some security armor. But as we reach the bottom side of after we finish our elevator journey, we can enter into this outpost in full. We find the corpses of some outcasts. If you remember, we kind of were in the middle of a civil war among the outcasts last we were here. And turning right, we can still see some of the living outcasts walking around the underside of the bunker. But entering in through this door, first, let's just take a quick peek around to see if there's anything else going on here. Imagine dead outcasts. Why are we here, you might ask? Well, passing through this door, we enter into an interrogation room with the corpse of someone on the ground here. This somebody is none other than Gary 23. What happened to Gary 23? I mean, he's obviously dead, but why is he here? What did the outcasts want with him? You can find a .32 pistol hiding behind some examination shelves. But Gary 23 is he's wearing a vault suit. Is this the same Gary, like, from 108? So, hold up. Flipping the guy over, yep, he is indeed wearing a Vault 108 jumpsuit. We see bloody remains of arms. What happened here? Well, if you will go back in time with us for a second to when we first started working with the Brotherhood outcasts here, we remember that they wanted us to use our Pip-Boy to activate an old pre-war simulation device so they could unlock the secrets of the simulation as well as unlock the armory here. And again, they needed a Pip-Boy in order to run the simulation. So my guess is that they were trying to enlist Gary 23 here for a similar purpose. There is also a cut holotape relating to Gary 23 here, and why we find him dead on the floor. The Brotherhood outcasts had essentially stumbled upon Gary 23 out in the wasteland and noticed that he was a vault dweller with a working Pip-Boy. So somehow they either kidnapped him or coerced Gary 23 here to follow them back here to the outpost, where they attempted to reason with Gary so they could maybe get him to run the simulation. But as we've discovered from our experiences with the Garys, their vocabulary consists of maybe 2 words, their own name and no. They have no vocabulary whatsoever other than, again, their own name. And in this holotape, that is all Gary 23 says. Just Gary, over and over again with various inflections in his voice depicting fear. He was terrified and had no idea what the outcast wanted from him. They tried to convince him to at least either, if he wasn't going to cooperate, to at the very least give them the Pip-Boy. But Gary 23 here refused, more than likely not understanding what they wanted. And so the holotape ends with one of the outcasts grabbing a buzzsaw and chopping his arm off. I'm guessing in the process the Pip-Boy itself was damaged, so that was a dead end. Also, quite literally, because they, in this process, killed the Gary. What a horrific tale. And while our experiences of the Garys while we were exploring Vault 108 have been negative, they've all been hostile, there's almost a childlike simplicity to them that's kind of sad. Makes me kind of sad. Again, the Gary in the holotape was panicking, saying, Gary? Gary? Very, very freaked out, and he died because he couldn't communicate, couldn't understand what they wanted, and they could have just forced the thing off his arm if they really wanted it that badly. They didn't have to resort to chopping the limb off. I mean, a Pip-Boy is a piece of clothing, essentially, where you can remove the device, either willingly or you can, pull the thing off. You didn't need to chop his limb off. I guess desperate times, desperate measures and all that, but ay caramba, what an atrocity here. But our story continues. Heading to the Citadel, the remains of the Pentagon, the Brotherhood of Steel proper has set up their fortifications here. Heading across the Citadel, we enter into the A wing of the location. Heading on in and heading down a staircase, the Brotherhood of Steel has been doing a fair share of research into some of the pre-war companies here. Pass by some soldiers just minding their own business, doing their job.
Need something, friend?
The Brotherhood is at your service.
Yeah, thanks, pal. But there's a reason why we're here. While exploring the Scribes wing of the Citadel, we come across the Vault Tech Terminal. This terminal, okay, has a lot of stuff missing from it, unfortunately, but it does have some information into some local vaults, including a Vault 76. We'll come back to this one eventually. But of course, the entry we're after here pertains to Vault number 108. You can find some information here. Vault number 108. Starting construction date, March of 2061. Ending construction date, December of 2069 due to work stoppage. Total number of occupants, 475. Total duration, 38 years. I'm guessing that's how long the experiment was supposed to last. Computer control system, none. Primary power supply, a General Atomics nuclear power. Note, main supply designed to fail after 240 months. So the experiment's going on for 38 years, and for 240 months, that's close-ish to 20 years, I think, if my math is semi-correct. So we know the experiment is cloning, which I'm guessing whatever technology, like, unless they're doing the cloning process that we have in real life, if they have some sort of cloning technology, I'm guessing that it would eat up quite a bit of power. So for 20 years, this vault will have power, but after that 20-year time frame, the main power cuts for some reason. But the vault is still expected to continue its experiment for an additional 18 years, running on, I'm guessing, some sort of auxiliary power. What's the point of that? Heading on to page 2 of this entry, we find secondary power supply, a steam whistle mini geothermal. There's a note from the administrator saying that we are aware that the steam whistle is only sufficient to power this project partially. Please do not file any further reports on this issue. So yeah, they were fully expecting the power system to shut off after a bit of time and then partially power the project for the remaining 18 years of the proposed experiment. What's the plan here? We also find that the vault has been stocked with some non-standard equipment, as well as triple the normal issue of defensive weaponry, which explains why the Garys were armed. And we also find another note. Do not stock with standard entertainment. So, okay, we have a vault here, which its experiment is cloning. The clones produced are all homicidal to non-clones. There are a plethora of weapons here, which these maniacal Garys can get their hands on and use to, I'm assuming, kill off the other vault dwellers. And the vault's power is designed to fail after 20 years. And additionally, this experiment is going to be going on for another 18 years, running off of some second-grade power supply. And on top of all of this nonsense, they're not even going to get any entertainment. No television, no holotapes, no music, nothing. We found a lot of books, so I guess you could read. But I'm guessing those are books brought in by some of the vault dwellers, not provided by Vault Tech itself. So, at least they had books to read. But if you weren't a big fan of reading, then I'm guessing there's not much else for you here other than Gary. And we already know how the Garys behave. The next entry under the Vault 108 Information tab goes into personnel assignments, with the Overseer, Brody Jones, the Chief of Staff, Zachary K. Jameson, Chief of Security, Jarek Maddox, Morale Officer, Nathan Oregon, and we find another researcher note. All standard positions have been intentionally left unfilled and will be assigned by the Overseer according to the Vault 108 protocols. According to the pre-assignment medical test, Mr. Jones has a genetic disposition for a rare terminal strain of cancer, which should ideally cause him to expire within 40 months of the project's inception. These two events should combine to allow a proper catalyst that allows this project to continue as planned. What? So, okay, on top of this, on top of all the stuff we've already covered, the Overseer is going to die soon. He has cancer, which should, quote, ideally cause him to die within 40 months of the project's inception. That is, I'm not good at math, but I know good and well that that is nowhere near anywhere close to the amount of time this experiment is supposed to run. The power is going to outlast Overseer Jones here. There are a lot of unfilled positions in Vault 108 that the Overseer will have to fill up with various Vault Dwellers, I'm guessing, who will probably lack the experience of running whatever position they're appointed to, because they're not Vault Tech staff. They didn't pass through Vault Tech University or weren't trained in these sort of leadership roles. I mean, who knows? Maybe the random appointees would do well, but again, we're dealing with a situation where they're gonna have to pick from the various residents, which again, the population is going to continue growing as more Garys are added to the pile. And on top of that, the Overseer is going to die. 40 months is the time that Vault Tech is assuming it's going to take. I'm guessing this entry was written close to when the bombs dropped, so we can assume that, at the end of 2077, when the vaults were put into effect, that at this point in time, Overseer Jones would have at least those 40 assumed months of his life left before passing on. But what if he died sooner? This whole situation is a conundrum and a half, because Jones is going to die at some point. That's going to create a power vacuum. He has to try to find people to staff his vault. Meanwhile, the doctor is making clones of this Gary person. What is happening here? Alright, we've been given a very weird story and not many pieces to put together. But I'm going to try to work with what we do know and what we don't know. So, Vault 108 was going to house 400-some people with a very short staff, with a lot of positions being intentionally left unfilled, with an Overseer who is not long for this world, and the Vault's power is going to cut within 20 years, leaving the Vault powered by some sort of auxiliary system, and they still expect the cloning experiment to persist for another 18 years. Again, at some point the Overseer is going to kick the bucket. There's going to be presumably a power vacuum unless he played his cards right and figured something out. There might be a power vacuum in the vault of who's going to be the next Vault 108 Overseer. Meanwhile, we have the Doctor here cloning people. Cloning this guy named Gary, who we don't know much of anything about. Gary could have been anybody. Just an average schmo who entered Vault 108 like anybody else. He could have been somebody on Vault Tech's staff. Could have been a lab assistant. Could have been a technician. Could have been anybody. But this mysterious Gary person was chosen as the subject for cloning. And we know that at least 54 clones were made. And none of them went well. We know that the Overseer was probably not too informed on this experiment, so at one point in time we probably have the Overseer being aware of this Gary guy's existence. And Gary's doing his thing in the vault, then suddenly there's another one of him. Then another one. And they're hostile. attacking researchers and potentially residents. And none of these cloning attempts are going particularly well. We have no idea of the time frame of how long this experiment lasted. We know it was long enough to make at least 54 Garys, however long that cloning process takes. And following the conception of all these Garys, eventually we're guessing that crap hit the fan at some point. Playing along here, and the overseer likely died, was replaced by somebody else. Hopefully he staffed the place with people he saw fit. But we have regardless of the politics of the Vault's overseer and the Vault's head honchos, we still have additional confusion here with the Doctor and his crew of scientists who are making the Gary clones. With, again, no success. Let's just assume that maybe, perhaps, by some stretch of the imagination, the experiment did persist, at least for those 20 years. They made a lot of Gary clones, to the point where the Doctor, by the 53rd and 54th attempt, had decided that, okay, we have too many of these Gary clones and none of them are going well, so it's time to purge some of the previous attempts. But then in this made-up story here of we don't know what happened, but let's just say that maybe the power cuts. The 20-year time frame is up, the power cuts, and the doors to the Gary's holding cells open back up, and they get released into the rest of the vault. They arm themselves with the plethora of weaponry Vault-Tec provided, and they kill everybody they possibly can in the vault. Now, judging by the barricades implemented by the women of the vault, we can assume that they likely survived at least the initial massacre that resulted when the Garys got free and got a hold of weapons. And they barricaded themselves into their section of the vault, into their dormitory. But I'm guessing that the dormitory wasn't the best equipped in terms of food and water. And somewhere along the line, they likely may have died off of starvation or of dehydration. Or if they were lucky, and maybe let's say that they did have enough food and water to last them, they likely would eventually then die off of old age. But at least they wouldn't get slaughtered by Garys. Or maybe on a lighter note, perhaps there was another doorway that connects to maybe the entryway of the vault. And maybe the women were able to make a mass exodus from Vault 108 and make it out into the wasteland where they wouldn't have to deal with the Garys. We don't know. But we do know that the Garys got out. Somewhere along the line, they opened the door and left Vault 108, making their way across the wasteland and interacting with people like the Brotherhood outcasts. I believe there's also a random encounter where you can stumble upon Gary clones just wandering the wasteland, and just as expected, they are immediately hostile. So you might be able to encounter Garys out in the wastes. But that is the majority of the story we have from Vault 108. There's not much to say, other than a lot of the speculation that we've had to go through here. But my friends, the trail does not 100% go cold after our conclusions here. For 10 years later, in 2287, while we are exploring the remains of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, we discover some remnants from the Garys, suggesting that these Gary clones, or some of the Gary clones, migrated north, left the Washington, D.C. area and made their way to Massachusetts. Exploring various buildings across the Commonwealth, we stumble across building blocks arranged to spell out the name Gary. Most notably, if you recall our time exploring Vault 75 and some of the living quarters in that vault, we find these blocks spelling out Gary scattered across the vault. So possibly the Gary clones may have stumbled upon Vault 75, and being vault dwellers themselves, might have made that vault their home for a bit, at least until the Gunners or Institute or Brotherhood of Steel showed up. But we do know that the Garys more than likely made their way here, inscribing their name in building blocks across the Commonwealth. But I also heard rumor of something interesting, that quite a ways north of Vault 75, we stumble across a fish packing plant. I heard an interesting rumor about this place. So heading up north, we find the Makra fish packing plant. This is a decent distance north of Salem. I've heard that a raider gang once took up residence here, and sure enough, we find the corpse of a raider in one of these security pods. But there's an interesting tidbit about these raiders. Take a look at this guy's face. Right? Look at his face for a second. Memorize it. It's standard looking raider, right? You can find some bottle cap mines and other decent loot throughout this pod. But again, pay attention to the face of that raider. As we continue to explore around the outside of the fish packing plant, we find another raider corpse. Dragging him out of the shadows, we notice that he's practically identical to the other raider we found. Look at that. That is almost clear as day, an identical twin of the other raider here. However, this could be just coincidence, right? After all, we've only found 2 bodies thus far. Perhaps in this gang we did have a gang which had a couple identical twins in it. Which is why we find these 2 dudes who are practically clones. Yeah, if we lay them side by side, they are in fact identical. But folks, it gets weirder. Heading on closer to some crates, you find a little campsite, some campfire, and you find 2 more raider corpses. And once again, the faces of both of these raiders are identical to the other 2 we found. Heading up some scaffolding here, we find the corpse of a female raider. So she's not a clone like the other bunch here. Yeah, she's unique. But this is bizarre. We found a raider gang up here that consists dominantly of what appears to be clones. Could this raider gang have been composed of Gary? Well, as bizarre as this whole situation is, I don't think so. And here's why. Personally, if it's your headcanon that these are Garys, that's really cool. And I can definitely see that, because where else in Fallout do we see such identical people? We don't see a lot of NPCs like that, at least in Fallout 4. So the fact that these raiders are practically clones is an interesting little tidbit of information that we have here. Not to mention the widespread uses of the name Gary, spelled out in blocks across the Commonwealth. We know that Garys likely made their way here at some point. So, is it too far-fetched to assume that these potentially immortal clones made their way to this fish packing plant? Well, my thing here is still no. From what we know about the Garys is that they are hostile towards anybody who is not a clone. They have sort of like the clone troopers from Star Wars, a brotherly bond with their fellow clones. They don't hurt each other. However, anybody who is not a clone, they show severe aggression towards. Which is why I do not see them cooperating with other raiders. Because we find a couple women in among the corpses of the raider gang. And obviously the women here are not Gary clones. So I don't think that the raiders here, despite how similar they all look, I don't think they're Gary clones. Because I don't think they would be in a gang with anybody who isn't a clone. Additionally, I think that because of all the obvious Easter eggs to Garys, whether it's just a fun play from Bethesda, like, oh, look at the fun Gary reference we have here, or if it is definitive proof that the Gary clones did make that migration north, which I do believe, because of the connection here, I think that if they really were Gary clones, they would be labeled as such. It just seems like it would be such a throwaway for these unnamed raiders to be Garys. Because after all the building that has been done with the Garys across Fallout 3 and 4, with what we do know about the Gary clones in particular, and again, also the Easter eggs to them with the building blocks, I think that if these were actual Garys, they would be labeled, Gary whatever, when we stumbled upon the remains of this raider gang. I don't know what happened. I can't explain why this gang is composed of what is seemingly a bunch of clones. And again, I don't know. It could just be as simple as just a bunch of reused assets, or even a glitch. Who knows? But we do know that the Garys were hostile to everybody outside of their clone group. So again, I think it's pretty safe to say that the clones here are not Garys. I can't explain why they're all identical. I have no idea. Again, it could just be as simple as an oversight, a bug, or if it's intentional, maybe it's just like one of these whatever really random conclusions or encounters or whatever, but I don't think they're Garys. Because of all the evidence that we have about the Garys, from how other references to the Garys in Fallout 4 were handled. That's my take on it. I don't think they're Garys, but it's still an interesting little question to ask anyway, right? This is still a very interesting situation that I look forward to hearing your takes on. This, my friends, concludes the story of Vault 108. A very interesting trail of breadcrumbs leading us all over the place, making us have to work with various factions and do more than our fair share of digging into trying to piece together what happened in probably the least explained vault. But what did you think about Vault 108? What do you think about its experiments about cloning in Fallout? About the background information we have about the overseer who's gonna die soon, or the weird entertainment situation. What do you think about the Raider gang here in Fallout 4? Do you think they're Garys? Leave your thoughts and suggestions in the comment section down below. I look forward to reading over your thoughts and theories. Thanks for watching, folks, and as always, Maxusthebeast is out.